Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm starting us off this morning on behalf of the CNA Junior Scientist Council. I just want to note that this seminar will be recorded, and our speaker in this seminar is Dr. Qina Yan. She is a postdoc research fellow at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Qina earned her PhD and master degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2019 and 2014 in Professor Kumar's group. Her current research focuses on the watershed scale modeling and prediction mass and fluxes of soil thicknesses and organic matter using coupled geomorphological, hydrological, biochemical approaches. She is going to talk to us today about estimating soil thickness, organic matter, and surface transport fluxes in mountainous hillslope. So without further ado, let's welcome Qina, and microphone is yours.
Thank you, Muskan. So I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Can you see my desktop?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, excited to share some of my postdocs work with you today. So I'm gonna talk about how I qualify the soil thickness, organic matter, and the surface fluxes in an opposite facing hill slopes in a mountainous area. And this work is funded by the SFA project. So I'm gonna start. Okay, I'm gonna start give a background of what the project is. So this is also a very big project. I think a similar scale as the CZO, and they look at the ecosystem functioning. So they mostly focus on the hydrological, biological, and geological processes. I think one of their unique things is to divide the watershed into several functional zones. Here they divide into 5 functional zones based on land cover, bedrock type, soil type, and etc. Mostly used by using remote sensing data to divide to the functional zones, and they look at pretty much similar as the CZO processes, like surface processes, subsurface processes from the canopy to bedrock. And regarding their techniques, they use multi-method to sense from bedrock to canopy, like remote sensing, drones, satellite data, flux tower, also lots of field measurement, I think lots of geophysics activities, like geophysics measurement, like subsurface bedrock type, fractures, groundwater table, etc. So the study site is in the East River watershed in Colorado. The location is near the Crystal Butte, and this specific site is called the Pump House because this little white house here is called Pump House. Use a kind of a public service here. Where the general goal of the watershed functioning scientific focus area is to predict the watershed hydrological and the biogeochemical responses to perturbations, like perturbations meaning drought and flood, and hydrological and biogeochemical responses. They're mostly focused on the chemical reactions, the metals stuff. CQ relationship, the concentration discharge relationship, weighs a lot here. So for the specific study site in the East River watershed, it's a Colorado Upper Basin, and it's one of the major water resources for drinking, agriculture, and hydropower. And the human activities here is mostly from the road exploitation and some cattle, some herding needs. The annual average total precipitation is about 600 millimeters. Total snowfall is 5 meters. So they have almost, I think, more than half a year is covered by snow or frozen ground. And the minimum annual average temperature is 11 and minus 7.8 degrees Celsius respectively. So that's the background of the larger area. And for my own work, so I aim to quantify the soil and organic matter mass and fluxes in 2 of the 5 functional zones, because there are total 5 functional zones, and so far we only intensively collect the samples in two of them, so I can only do 2 of them, and they are extend the area beyond, and more when more field work comes, we can investigate other functional zones. So for my model, I combine process-based model by using remote sensing and field measurement as to validate it, and I also use machine learning or random forest as a tool to generate some spatial map, which I will talk about in the following slides. I first started doing soil thickness to quantify soil thickness. From there, we can qualify the carbon mass and nitrogen mass, because that's soil thickness provide the volume for them. And with the mass and density, we can qualify the transport fluxes of both soil and organic matter. So this talk gonna follow this logic path. Before I go, I think so this is my specific study site, the two hill slopes. This one facing southwest, so it's called southwest facing hill slope. And this one facing northeast is called northeast facing hill slope. These 2 terms are kind of very essential here, are very important. The SF and F, and they happen to be two different functional zones because they have different aspects, land cover, etc. So this is in Colorado, about here. So the bigger boundary is the river watershed, and the red small one is my study site at the pump house area. My data set, again, they include remote sensing data, some soil samples, like we went out to the field to drill some tiny wells to collect samples, and also use some time series data. So I can start the topic of soil thickness. So the hypothesis is that soil thickness is very spatially heterogeneous because of this aspect and a very steep topography. And the bottom layers are shale and weathered shale, which are also called saprolite. So because of this very high spatial heterogeneity of these vectors, the soil thickness is assumed to be heterogeneous. So I use machine learning, process-based models and film sampling plus a machine learning tool to estimate that. Based on the previous studies, we can already qualitatively know that the soil thickness tends to be thinner in the southwest facing. That's where southwest is, so you get lots of direct sunlight, as I illustrated here, and they tend to be the soil layer tends to be drier, and from the geological like ground sensing, they have less weathered shale versus the north facing side. They have a more weathered shale. And the stream path in the south facing is mostly dry. It's dry most of the year, except for a few days when there are extensive snow melting events. And the rock size or the gravel size are also larger in the south facing. And if you go to the field, you can see this kind of the terraces, the Asian terraces features are more obvious in the south facing than the north facing. So we went on the field twice in 2019, and we used two different two independent method to measure the soil thickness. One is called penetrometer data. So this is like a hammer. You just leave it and drop it, and the hammer gonna hit this plate. There's a sensor in the top of this needle, so they get some, I think it's electric resistance, and you can see the signals. Like you can see a strong signal transition from soil to bedrock or saprolite. So we use that as a hint for the soil thickness layer. We also use a more straightforward way, but well, so you drill, it's an auger, it's a manual auger, you just use your hands to push it down and you pull it out. You check this materials you got, and just by experience, based on your own, the best estimation, we can tell like how deep the soil layer is. And so we take the average between these two methods, and I show the result here. So I separate north facing and south facing hill slopes. First of all, there's only, so bare soil is only in north facing hill slope, and there's only forest in north facing hill slope. And the bare soil actually is from the roots. The roots are only in the north facing hill slope. So we drop there, and to cross from north facing to south facing, we had to wear boots and cross a very shallow but super wide river, and carry all the heavy equipment. So anyway, so we got the result. This north facing hill slope and south facing. You can see that the south facing hill slope is a little bit more like diverse. The variance is higher in the south facing hills than north facing hills. So I'll explain their influence later. So it's a primary like field result from this field method. And so here I'm going to talk about like briefly talk about the modeling approach. So it's actually a hybrid approach, like I combine two independent method. So from here, the mass conservation equation for soil thickness, where H represents the soil thickness, is that it equals to the soil formation rate from either bedrock or saprolite. By the way, saprolite is the weathered bedrock, weathered shell in this case, and minus the transport rate from the surface. So that's a changing rate of your soil layer. And if we can assume that in over a long period and in a non-disturbed landscape and natural area, we can assume that soil thickness changing rate equals to 0, and then use a small model to demonstrate that. Like basically after 25,000 years, and the soil thickness kind of stable. So I assume that the thickness changing rate equals 0, and replace the formation rate, which is this part, and the transport rate, which is this part. And we can solve this equation easily, and calculate the soil thickness H in this equation. There's one more problem. What if the left two parts, they are positive? Okay, sorry, it's a typo. My point is, if this is negative, over this is correct. I'm confused. Okay, this is wrong. If this is positive, so if it's deposition area and the left two part, they are positive. And because the formation rate is always larger, equal or larger than 0, so there would be no realistic number for the soil thickness. In that case, adopt Patton's method, where's the pure empirical relationship So you have two parameters to fit, and the C is the curvature at the site. So you're gonna have a linear relationship between soil thickness and curvature. I adopted that for the positional side. And I use this mass conservation equation for the erosional side. So after solving this equation and after calibrating the parameters, I can regarding the calibration, I'll talk about in the next few slides. So the result is that we got a soil map, and I compared the prediction value with the observation value. So in general, the north-facing side hillslope has deeper soil thickness, and also the north-facing hillslope has more saprolite than rock. The saprolite or rock type is not from the modeling; it's just directly from the field measurement. And also use the
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Could you just go back one slide? Just a very brief question. So what in this equation distinguishes north-facing versus south-facing? How do you distinguish that in this equation?
Good point.
What parameters, what attributes would distinguish?
Exactly. This equation itself cannot tell whether it's south-facing or north-facing. What I did in my work is that I calculate the north-facing and south-facing separately. So when I run the calibration, actually it's this slide. So I follow this path to go through a calibration, and for the two areas separately, and so you get different sets of parameters.
Okay, keep going. We'll come back.
Yeah. Yeah, but we didn't treat like the aspect factor in this equation. Well, definitely the aspect can affect the weathering rate. So I did a sensitivity analysis for also for north-facing and the south-facing hillslope. It turns out the diffusion coefficient in the landscape evolution model and the weathering rate decay parameter, they are most significant parameters that affect the soil thickness, which are the triangle, orange, yellow triangle, and the brown triangle here, respectively. By the way, for the Morris one step at a time method, so here in the figure you see the absolute mean value, they represent the significant impact. So the higher value, the more important, the more significant the parameter is. And in the y-axis is theta. So it represents a non-linearity. So higher value, the higher, the more non-linearity of that parameter. And you can see that the diffusion coefficient and weathering decay parameters stand out. Yeah, here's I hope I didn't confuse you too much. So to clarify, I prepared a workflow to show how I get the parameters. So yeah, again, to answer Professor Kumar's question, I think it's also important to highlight here. We separate the areas between north-facing and south-facing hillslopes. So I have one, for example, now I run a model for north-facing hillslope. So I have a set of parameters around the soil transfer equation, and from there I can divide whether it's an erosional cell or the positional cell. If it's erosional cell, it's the mass conservation method. Otherwise, it's the empirical method, which is the pattern method. And then we can generate the soil thickness map. And then we can calculate the root mean square error between the modeling and sampling data, and then start the loop back again. We'll try another set of parameter and see. One kind of very trivial but important thing, actually it's a very important thing here. It's about how to decide the curvature, like what is the resolution you use from your DM to do curvature, because topographic features like curvature and slope, they're super sensitive to the resolution of your DEM. So I tried 3 ways. I think I only I didn't see any literature talk about like this to this level details in here. So I tried different ways. One is you can have a moving window to smooth the DEM over space. Right, so after you smooth the DEM, you can keep calculating the curvature. So the x-axis represent the smoothing range. This represent. So the first method is a smoothing over, I call it smoothing over space method. You can see how that change with one set of parameters. So in this figure, the only changing thing is the curvature resolution. You can see how that affect the result. Here, the result is arrow between sampling and modeling points. And then another way, which is the ArcGIS way, is to use a polynomial fitting. So they're thinking it's a circle, and can do a polynomial, just a second order polynomial fitting. But you can choose the director, you can choose the diameters. You can choose, for example, the smallest one in my case is 0.5 meter. That's my the LiDAR DEM resolution. And you can go with 1 meter, 2 meter, or as long as you want. And then calculate the curvature based on that. And the third way I found is most effective way is to run the diffusion equation, like the diffusion process in landscape evolution model. So your DEM actually smooth. It's also smooth over space, and it's also smooth over time, because in every time step, your DEM smooths more. And so that's a blue, represent the blue line here. It's so it's very obvious the blue, sorry, not blue, green lines. It's very obvious the green lines decrease more efficiently, like give it smaller RMS, the arrows between sampling and measurement. So I go with that. I think it's one of what the unplanned discovery in this work. So with the model or the hybrid model approach I designed, we can also have extra information, not only soil map, not only the soil thickness map, but also another two things. One is the transport, the diffusion transport map, and this is weathering rate. These are from the calibration of this, following this workflow. So a brief summary here is that I noticed is that at the positional side, soil thickness have a linear relationship with the positional rate. That's basically because we use the empirical method. That's where the soil thickness has a linear relationship with curvature, and the curvature has a linear relationship with the transport rate. So you also got the linear relationship between the transport rate and soil thickness. But for the positional area, the left part, it's kind of soil thickness decrease exponentially with increasing erosional rate. It also goes back to the equation where the weather rate, it has a exponential relationship with the curvature. So that's why we got this result. So in general, compare the transport rate and weather rate in northern facing, south facing hillslope. So south facing hillslope has faster transport rate, higher soil formation rate, and a thinner soil thickness. So that's basically the work on my soil thickness study. And the last thing I did initially for fun, then I realized it was very important, is that I used machine learning method to like get the soil thickness map independently. Here we're gonna need several features. So it's all either topographic feature. So it's both a combined topographic feature and a vegetation feature. We have over 50 features. So I put 5 here to highlight the features. For example, the curvature, elevation, slope. TPI is topographic position index, and the TWI topographic wetness index. And some other vegetation features is like NDVI, mostly from remote sensing, and carbon, plant nitrogen, etc. But they are not that important from from the result of the random forest model. Here you can see that by comparing prediction observation for soft thickness, the machine learning gives the error of 22.5 centimeter, and my hybrid process-based simulation gives almost a 20 centimeter error. So I think they are pretty close. So we have more confidence to use machine learning method to map the organic carbon and nitrogen. So here, this is my second part. I talk about how to generate a spatial map of carbon and nitrogen. So you can see that carbon, they decrease exponentially along depth, as same as nitrogen. Tn represent total nitrogen. These are at the sampling points again, and the four box plots are the stock and density for carbon and nitrogen respectively. You can see that the north-facing hillslope has higher stock for both carbon and nitrogen. That's mostly from the soil thickness influence, because the soil thickness are higher in north-facing hillslope. But if you look at the surface density, the north-facing and south-facing hillslope are kind of similar, and the surface density are most influenced by the land cover. So looks like the north-facing and south-facing land covers are not that different. There's only a very small patch of forest in the north-facing, but other than that, the land cover are similar. The shrubs, they're mostly shrubs and the low grasses. One more before we move on to the modeling part, I found a very interesting thing from the sampling data is that the surface carbon in north-facing hillslope, which represent by the blue dash lines, it has slightly higher spatial variation than the south-facing hillslope. One of the factor in the north-facing hillslope is that the land cover is more diverse. So that might be the reason. And if we look at the stock, the south-facing is more diverse because if you remember, the soil thickness in the north-facing is more diverse. So that's the stock looks like influence more on the stock rather in the south-facing. And one more funny thing I noticed, you can see that there's like sharp, like something like a missing data from south-facing hillslope. So that's probably meaning we don't collect enough data. Like it's not. We probably need to plan better next time and make sure the curve goes down, like cover this period. Okay, so I want to show you the result and make sure. I want to check the time quickly. Okay, talk too slow. By the way, Moscan, when should I stop?
I think you have 50 minutes to talk, 45 to 50 minutes to talk.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can go faster. So here is a map from points to spatial map of organic carbon and total nitrogen. Again, so this is the data. This is a comparison between prediction and observation. This is for nitrogen. This is for carbon, and the right one is for nitrogen. It looks like the random forest did a better job for nitrogen than carbon. So it looks like carbon is more affected by more features, and yeah, I think it's very hard to find the good, like to tune the hyperparameters to find the best fit. But regarding the importance, which is kind of a important output from the random forest, is that we noticed the topographic wetness index is the most important feature. And then overall, the topographic features are more important than the vegetation features somehow. Like, so for example, curvature elevation, topographic position index, TPI, and TWI, they're all topographic features, and NDVI, liquid water, and then many others are vegetation features. So here I only show the top 7 most important features here for both carbon and nitrogen. Yeah, it looks like the wetness index is the most important factor for both of them. After generate the map, now I can use this as an input for my model, as an initial input, initial condition for my model. And I'm gonna run the erosion equations, soil erosion equations to see how fast, how much they transport. The first thing we need to figure out is the overland flow, because overland flow is the driving force, like provide the shear stress for the soil material to move. Here we tested 2 years. We have 2007, the water year is started from October 1st and ends in September 30th. So the whole year, so this is called the water year 2017. It's called a wet year. It's just because you have more precipitation, like historically higher precipitation. And another year, the following year, the following water year is much drier. It's also historically drier, so we just call it dry year. We'd like to compare the result between these 2 years, like qualifying this the soil material movement. We also need to another important input forcing data is the snow water equivalent, as shown in the brown line. The discharge is used just to see, get a sense of like how when the snow melting started, whether the stream generated. It's not a inputting factor to the model. And we also have temperature. You can see the in the wet year, the temperature is slightly slower than the dry year. So we use Amazon ATS. It's also a very complex model. It's similar as DARA, I think, regarding the level of complex. And it's also very super computational, like the computation cost or computation heavy model. So we got the daily time step of the overland flow in 2 years. This is a spatial mean value of the water depth or water ponding or surface ponding depth in this simulation period. And we compare that with the discharge to see to get a sense whether the simulation result makes sense or not. So it's pretty good match. And from there, we use that to drive the surface transform model. Again, the model I use is the scale model I developed in Professor Kumar's group. And so so the primary output from the model is like I have a transport rate map for both soil, carbon, and nitrogen. So for simplicity, I only show the transport rate here. But for carbon and nitrogen, they're pretty similar visually like this. And then I separate the values in erosional and depositional site. And I separate the locations in hill slopes and floodplains, because we want to know how much soil materials is transported laterally from hill slope to floodplains and how much is transported from floodplains to streams. So these are the hill slope area, and that's highlighted in floodplain and stream. So the main results I highlight here, in general, so hill slopes, you can see have higher erosion than deposition. So hill slopes is losing soil material and floodplains are gaining soil material. And soil transport rate in the wet year, which are the left 2 columns, it's about 2.7 times higher by average. in than the dry year. But soil transport and carbon transport rate, they are both about 2 times higher in wet year and dry year. If you see the precipitation, it's roughly half also, like precipitation intensity is, accumulated precipitation is about half. It's about double of from the wet year than the dry year. And I think it has the mismatch between 2.7 and 2.1 is because the carbon and nitrogen, they have exponential decreasing profiles, right? So once you remove the top layer, and the subsurface layer, they have a less, the carbon content, nitrogen content are less. So they can, so these values should be lower than the transport rate. Also, I compare the influx and efflux of soil carbon, the total nitrogen. So I summarize here, the blue color represent the values in wet year. The black text represent the value in dry year. And they are for soil carbon and nitrogen respectively. There are lots of numbers here, but I summarize the key things here. So in the hillslope, wet year, the soil transport in wet year is this much higher, and floodplains this much, and this is in streams, the wet year is 2.4 times more material to a stream than the dry year. And these are numbers for carbon. So carbon and nitrogen, they're pretty similar, similar magnitude. And yeah, these are the values. And I compare the nitrogen flux compare my nitrogen flux from the floodplain to a stream with other nitrogen fluxes, because we want to have a sense of whether the surface transport should be considered in the future. Like so far, we don't have a measurement of surface material transport. So we want to have a sense in the future whether we need to install sensors to measure the erosion rate. So this is the published data in the same hillslope, in the North Facing hillslope, by a team member by the SFA team member, Jiaming. And this is the nitrogen flux she estimated in her study. So you can see that atmospheric deposition plus together it's about 5.4 kilogram nitrogen per hectare per year, and the total dissolved nitrogen is 10.6. And in my wet year, this is my total amount of nitrogen export to the stream. If you use this number divided by the total area, this is the number of nitrogen from floodplain to stream, and this is very comparable to the other two fluxes. So this give a hint of like whether like the team should prepare in the future years to measure the surface processes. Lastly, I want to look at some relationship between the soil transport and carbon transport, and this is soil transport and nitrogen transport, and this is carbon transport and nitrogen transport. So you can see that most of they're in general very linear, but at the high deposition or high erosional areas, the data are more sparse, like variations are higher. I think that's probably because in those areas, that's the macro topography features are more like play a more important role. Like you have more little depressions in the high depositional and high erosion area. However, in the transitional area, it's more kind of smooth, and so yeah, so it gives this kind of pattern. One thing I noticed that, but I don't fully understand, is the pretty so nice linear relationship between nitrogen and carbon, because for the transport, the nitrogen and carbon, they are calculated independently. But it looks like they maintain a relatively good ratio all the way yeah, so the transport rate between nitrogen and carbon, they are kind of very consistent in most of the areas. Well, to summary, let me check my time. To summary, so in the southwest facing hill slope where you get lots of sunlight, we know the thickness are thinner. But the surface organic, both carbon and nitrogen is less spatially heterogeneous. Versus in the north facing hill slope, the surface carbon and nitrogen are more spatially heterogeneous, and they are probably affected by the vegetation cover because you have more various land cover features. But for the carbon stock and the south facing hill slope, they are more diverse, and that's influenced by the soil thickness. But the organic matter, both carbon and nitrogen stock in this northeast hill slope, they are more heterogeneous. The soil thickness are thicker, so maybe that creates a buffer to ease the variance. Regarding the flux, the south facing hill slope has higher transport rate in general. And by comparing wet and dry years, it's about this 2.7 times higher in wet year for soil, and 2.2 times higher in wet year for carbon and nitrogen. And last, kind of very important thing for the team is that the surface lateral transport of nitrogen is a very important factor and should be measured in the future. Next phase, probably this year, we're gonna go out the field and measure some surface fluxes. Okay, that's the talk. This is the end of my talk. I'm happy to take any other questions. Moskan, should I hand over to you?
Yeah, thank you for a great talk and sharing your research. So everyone, you are welcome to unmute yourself, and we are happy to hear your comments and questions.
Hey, Qina, I'll go first.
Sure.
So can you leave that slide on, the one which you had last one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the, it's my understanding, that the reason that the north and the south facing slope, northeast, southwest, whatever, is the amount of energy that is incident on those two slopes. The north facing slope receive less energy, and south facing slope receive more energy. As a result, the soil moistures are different, and as a result, the ecosystems are different. All other factors remaining the same. So my question, which I asked earlier, what is in that equation to distinguish between north and south facing? My guess would be that temperature may play a surrogate for the energy that is impinging on the north and south facing. And as a result of that, temperature dependent processes might be important.
Like snow melting events.
The snow melt, the evaporation, the transpiration, the way the ecosystem moves moisture, right? So I think that's one of the big drivers of the differences that you see between north and south facing. I mean, there might be an underlying geological differences, the way these valleys have been formed, and that might be embedded. So my guess is that all that is being subsumed under the calibration that you're doing. So when you're calibrating, a lot of this physical mechanism is being subsumed into the parameters of the model. And so I was just wondering what your thoughts are. I mean, I know we had talked about not having the temperature dependency in the scale model, but we were running it on a pretty flat landscape at that time, and but here it would be important. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Exactly. That's why when I get the Overland Flow, I cannot use the scale model. I have to adopt the Amazon Ats model. It's led by Sergi and his team. Now I joined Sergi's team also, by the way, with Carol. Yeah, so this Ats model, they consider the temperature and the snow melting and evaporation, evapotranspiration, and also the bedrock, like for example, in the north facing, they have more weather because they have wetter soil bed, so the bedrock beneath are more weathered. Like the permeability are different between the north facing and south facing also. So the south facing has like more hard rock, the shale. These are all inputs in the Ats. So yeah, that's one thing to make sure we address the aspect issue.
Okay.
Yeah, but mostly it's in Overland Flow. And then after I get the Overland Flow, like daily output from there, I use that to drive the scale model. Yeah, first for the transport, we don't need to address the aspect directly because we only need the topography, the gradient, and then land cover. So yeah, as for the transport flux. But regarding the soil thickness, actually, yeah, it's a very good point. Actually, I was showing the parameter values probably between the north facing and south facing hill slope, because there's no place to consider the aspect like no soil moisture here, no ET, and no snow melting, but the parameter, sorry, I forgot to mention the red colors are the parameters we need to calibrate. So for example, B and H, they represent the soil formation rate, and they are different in north facing and south facing, right? Because both B and H, no, they are affected by like whether it's bedrock or weathered bedrock. Yeah, so I run the different hill slopes separately, and you can get the different sets of parameters.
Okay.
Like that. Yeah, because of this equation cannot address aspect directly, so I have to separate the aspects.
Got it.
So Qina,
Yes. Hey, Andrew.
I totally agree with Praveen. When I've been out in the mountains, it's typically on the north side of the slopes. The snow will persist even into the midsummer. So I think the south facing slope actually, because of all the energy that's being, all the solar energies hitting it, is probably all the soil is melting, or all the ground ice is melting, and so you're probably getting a lot more of the soil being active. So you could actually have a lot of slope movement of the soil down slope, and that's maybe why you're getting your different configuration of the surface topography. At one time, it probably looked either same on either side of the river, but over time, the south side has started to move, and that's why you're getting those benches probably.
Oh, you mean this? Like
yeah. So those are probably paraglacial features, and so you're probably getting a lot more melting during the day and freezing at night. So you're melting and freezing the water in the soil, at least during the springtime and the fall. So it's more of an active system than the north side, I think.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thanks for this comment. Yeah, I will include that in my paper. Thank you.
If there's no geological difference, that's the other thing would be is the bedrock different either side? But,
there is bedrock different. They are all both shale, but but north facing you have more weathered shale and then shale, like so when can I show you? Like,
if the shale is more weathered on the north side, I'd expect more not as steep a slope if it was
Right.
weathered. But it may just be the soil conditions and what's going on, whether it's frozen or not. So,
Right. Okay.
did
Cool.
anybody try and do like a geophysical profile across the south slope to see what the water table is during the year?
I believe so. There must be this data somewhere in the database.
Because I know Berkeley has a system they can so be similar to the one we would put up at the Sangam River Forest Reserve, where you're looking at the resistivity of the soil continuously over the year, and you can see the change in the water table.
Yeah, there are lots of resistivity measurement going on in this project in the Colorado, in the East River project. This guy, I'm not sure if you heard of him. His name is Sebastian Oleman. He is the leading person for most of this resistivity, like fieldwork measurement.
Okay.
Yeah, there are tons of. I think every year, what probably if not the most important, but one of the key activities measure the resistivity. Like I think they measured, for example, a lot. Like lots of money used on that. They mapped the whole floodplain area, and I think they also covered most of my study area somewhere here, like intensively.
That can really give you an idea where the water table is during the year, which would affect the soil processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right. He has a paper published recently in Nature, in Science Advances. I think definitely address the water table, and he also used machine learning to like extrapolate from sampling to space map, like spatial map. But sorry, I don't know the details like how the water table vibrate at this point. But if you are interested, I can definitely find some resources for you.
Okay. Yeah, very good project. Thanks.
Qina, hi, it's Neil.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Professor Blair.
So I'm kind of you've migrated from a very flat terrain to something that actually has some semblance of hills in it. And so that had to be a little bit of a shock to you to have to deal with that. But I'm wondering, have you tried to think about how the erosive processes might be changing? Like you're modeling things diffusively. And I know when I worked in California, diffusion was not a term that we used very frequently when we're talking about mass movement. Okay, we're dealing with gullies and landslides and stuff. And I don't know to what extent you're seeing things like that, but is that creeping into your models yet?
That's a very, very good point. Yeah, there are definitely many landslides. Not in my, because my little hill slopes, there are, or these two of the functional zones they defined. First, they also consider the landslides. I think that the two hill slopes I'm doing covers the two of the 5 functional zones, and these two don't have a landslide activities. They are very close to the stream, and they are not that steep compared to the upper stream. Like if you go, so this is my study site. You can see they're like grass, shrubs very close to stream. But if you go just maybe a few hundred meters to the upstream, and you go upper hill slope, like there are lots of landslide events, and you can visually tell because when you expose the rocks, the pebble, gravels, and the trees falling down. But yeah, my model currently cannot cover that. I don't think anyone in this team can simulate these processes actually.
It's a hard thing to simulate because it's very stochastic.
If you do get the soil thickness first, and that would be the first step to figure out like the like do a risk assessment for the landslide events. So the landslide depends on the soil water content, soil thickness, and the slope, right? So
The
yeah. That should be covered.
do you deal with particle grain size in your models? Because the few studies where I've seen on these types of hill slopes or people model them or actually done measurements, what they find is that the fines are winnowing off the hill slope. So the hill slope is becoming coarser in grain size, and the depositional sites are fine, and then that has a big impact on the carbon. Because you're preferentially moving carbon over sediment. So the carbon to sediment ratios are impacted, and I'm sure the carbon nitrogen ratios as well.
Definitely. It sounds very straightforward, right? We need to consider the grain size distribution. And yeah, I'm currently developing the model that consider the size mixture, like just as you described the processes. For this result I've shown today, no, they don't have it, but I'm exactly working on it recently to include the size, the grain size, like the fraction change when the material transport. Yeah, one more thing. Sorry, I forgot. Oh yeah, regarding the carbon nitrogen, absolutely. That's I'm also checking literatures like how to consider, like how to couple the different grain size and different carbon nitrogen and couple them in a process-based model on that. Yeah, so no, the current model doesn't have it. I know another national lab are trying to do some transport model as well, and their model also don't consider that. So yeah, it's absolutely the gap need to be considered, and it's very straightforward thing to do, I think.
So is there something in your model that would cause carbon and nitrogen to behave differently? I mean, you've got this perfect relationship emerging, but
yeah,
is
I use
what you put into it?
That's probably because I use the same enrichment ratio for both carbon and nitrogen. Yeah, the model currently, so you can define the enrichment ratio, like you give a constant number, or you can use a like depends on the transport rate. So for this, I use a constant enrichment ratio for both, especially for both carbon and nitrogen. That may be one of the reason. Yeah, so if we modify the model, first of all, include the different grain size transport, and also consider like the carbon nitrogen content density change caused by the grain size distribution. So yeah, that'll be awesome. That'll be exactly the next step I'm doing.
Thanks.
Thank you for a great comment.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It was a great presentation, Qina. The recording will be up in our webpage in YouTube, and we are going to share the link later today. Hope you enjoyed the session. We will see you next time.
Thank you, Meskin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Qina. Nice seeing you again.
Absolutely. Nice to see you guys.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Qina. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Andy, could you, can you stay on a